There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads and a new blouse. Just came in the mail yesterday. It's very cheap. It's my color. I'm very pleased with it. I have a very special guest. Stay tuned for that coming up soon. And before that, I do have one fairly major piece of personal news, and that is about Kenji's arrival. It has been pushed back yet again. It's not a huge surprise, but it is frustrating. The reason that I'm not all that disappointed is it's pushed back. We were really hoping he would get here by Christmas. The immigration process is not done. It will probably stretch into the winter of 2024. And so now our new kind of target date is March, April, something like that, of next year. And that will mean that we will have been apart 2 years out of our 5-year marriage, pretty much. So it's been a long wait. But despite the odds, despite the effort, and despite the time difference and all of the things that make it difficult to stay connected, we have stayed connected. And because of that, I'm okay. I have a bit of a reprieve on cleaning up my apartment to welcome him into it, to start sharing my home. But more than that, just, we're okay. As a couple, we're okay. We are getting through it together. And if it was Kenji getting cold feet, I would be a complete burning candles at midnight, neurotic mess dissolved into a puddle on the floor. Or even if he wanted a delay for some other reason, and that's not what it is, so I'm okay. It's just the bureaucracy. So, yeah, can deal with that. So that's my news about that. Oh, and the other thing is I want to get one, maybe two more bookshelves up before he gets here, because he does grumble about the amount of space my bookshelves take. He did it in Tokyo, so if they're up by the time he gets here, it's kind of grandfathering in some more bookshelves. Without further ado, let's go check out the mystery guest. Sharon Butala, the preeminent Canadian writer. Welcome to my Friday Reads from Calgary.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is very exciting. So, you've been doing anything recently? Any major achievements, accomplishments you'd like to talk about?
Well, I have survived all my reads for Leaving Wisdom, so I'm finished with that, or at least for the time being. That's the one. Yeah, it's a novel. And just about a week ago, I knew I wasn't really finished, but I was as finished as I could be without advice, and comments from knowledgeable readers. And so I sent the manuscript off to my agent.
This is your memoir, right?
That's right, my third memoir. And lucky for me, she had COVID and couldn't go to work. So she actually started to read it. Last time with Leaving Wisdom, it was months before she read it because I was something like number 5 in her lineup of manuscripts. So I felt I was pretty lucky. And so far, we have agreed. I mean, I said so in the email I sent to her. This book needs a rewrite, but I don't know what to do. It needs an editor. What do you think? And the thing that you always have to remember when you're a writer and a professional and you're earning money by doing it and so on, is that the response you get to a new manuscript is going to depend on what the reader does for a living or what kind of a reader that person is. So, of course, an agent with a big agency, as mine is going to be thinking immediately of how to make sure the book sells, which doesn't mean that if it's a really bad book, she's going to want you to revise it anyway. But she said right away, I think the first 2 chapters are, can't remember what word she used, too serious. You need to be lighter and so on. When my whole point, as if I may use the term artist, was that I was signaling to the serious reader, this is a serious book. It's not one of those romanticizing of what was really a bad childhood, or glamorizing of it, that kind of thing. So anyway, I thought to myself, I'm 83 years old. It's about time I had a bestseller. So okay, I'll lighten it up, but I don't know how yet. Anyway, long answer to a short question.
Fascinating answer.
You held the book up, The Perfection of the Morning,
Yeah.
1994. That was my big hit book. Everybody thinks it was my first book. It was book number 8. And that was about my leaving my urban life to live on a cattle ranch. And then my second memoir came out in, oh, yikes, 18, 19, in there. It was called Where I Live Now. And it was the memoir of my husband's death after our living together for 33 years in southwestern Saskatchewan on a cattle ranch and a hay farm, and how I dealt with bereavement and grief, and then trying to go from having been a rural woman into an urban woman again in the city of Calgary, which is, whoa, nightmare village in terms of the traffic and the
Helicopters.
difficulties of, pardon?
The helicopters.
Oh, yes, constant helicopters, yes, which are kind of entertaining in a way. And so this one, what's left? Everybody's saying, well, I'm 83. I've got, I try in this new one to write a narrative of my life. We all think I was born, I got married, I had babies, etc. But there's a psychological narrative. There's a psychic, and not psychic. Well, the narrative of the psyche is maybe more
Yeah,
like it.
that kind of psychic. That's right. And
Yeah.
that is such a throbbing through line to in Perfection of the Morning that just made it such an unforgettable read.
Hmm.
Sharon and I are going to be having a chat, a long, I think fairly long chat about this book coming soon. So looking forward to that.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to read it. And I'd like to pre-book you to come back once it comes out too.
Oh, okay, it's a deal. But first of all, I have to write it all over again, I guess, or it'll feel like writing it all over again. My agent also says now for nowadays it's too long. I'm going to have to chop, 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 which is not hard to do given the way I conceived of the novel, or I mean of the memoir.
Best of luck. And
Thank
have
you.
you been reading anything interesting recently, Sharon?
I sure have. I spend I try not to buy books anymore because when you're 83 and you only have one child and you don't know how many years you have left, but years in your own condo with your own bookshelves, that's a lot of books for one guy to figure out what to do with when I'm gone. So I'm trying to not get rid of the books I really want to keep, but at the same time, not to keep expanding because I've already got bookshelves in every room. So I use a public library, but I also have an online subscription to the New Yorker, and I get the Walrus in paper form. And I, if I get notices about articles in the New York Times, for instance, about a new Pulitzer winner or something, I'll make note. That's how I keep up. I don't very often read new books by new writers anymore. I feel like I'm more concerned with my own intellectual grasping of the zeitgeist or whatever, and I like to read the best literature. So some of these books that I've been spending last couple of weeks on, and yeah, they're overdue. Except the Calgary Library now says they just send you a notice saying that they have renewed the takeout. So you're never really late.
Saskatoon, they don't give
Uh,
you any overdue fines anymore, so it's kind of the
oh
same.
yeah, yeah, that's a good thing, I think. Well, Richard Flanagan, you remember him? He wrote The Narrow Road to the Deep North.
I
And
have not read anything by him, but I certainly know of him. Absolutely.
yeah, and that came out a few years ago. And he won the Man Booker, it means it's a darn good book. And I read it because I got a piece of hair sticking up. I can't figure out how to find there. I think I got it down.
I
Anyway,
had a
uh,
problem earlier, Sharon.
not an issue for you. I guess for you it's shine. You don't want too much shine.
Exactly. And yeah, what do you do about that, eh?
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, okay, so he won the Man Booker for The Narrow Road to the Deep North. And part of the reason why I was even interested in him was because I spent 6 weeks in Tasmania, and that's where he comes from and where he continues to live. So I had already read The Narrow Road to the Deep North when I went to Tasmania. So of course I was curious. I think I had anyway. So I was curious about, his life and all the rest of it. And my last trip to the library a couple of weeks ago, I saw a new book out by him, which turns out wasn't entirely new, called The Living Sky of Waking Dreams, which personally I think is way over the top for a title.
A little bit,
But
yeah.
yeah, I love The Narrow Road to the Deep North. I mean, the title, I love the book too, but I thought it was a really good title. So, anyway, this new book, I have finished reading it, and it's very, very different from The Narrow Road. The other was kind of realist fiction, and this one bops in and out of realism and a kind of lyricism and what? And a concern, the postmodernist concern for the environment, that sort of thing. So it's about a family where the father is already dead. One of the four children, I believe the oldest, the golden boy of the family, committed suicide at 14. The mother is still living, and there are three other kids two of the three who are hugely successful in an international sense in the fields they've chosen. They're very wealthy and they're very highly thought of in their fields, and uh, they're not very present. And the last child is a man named Tommy who stays home and paints pictures, looks after his mother, and has a severe stutter. And doesn't that make for an interesting configuration? So here's what happens. I won't go past this first thing. The mother, I believe she has a severe stroke, winds up in the hospital. So how are the kids going to deal with this? They fly in from wherever, and the two very successful ones immediately start giving orders, and there's no way their mother's going to die. And they keep this up and keep it up. It's whoa, I can't tell you how heartrending it is. And the guy who stays home and paints pictures argues, but he's so used to being beaten up by these two that he doesn't try very hard. So that's kind of the narrative arc. But at the same time, there's an awful lot in there about the technological revolution, the cell phones, what it does to people in terms of communication, and then also the environment, because Tasmania is a wonderfully beautiful place, and a lot of it is still wilderness, and it's being degraded as everywhere.
Tasmania is fascinating.
Isn't
What
it
little,
though?
well,
Yeah.
yeah, they have their own unique species, kind of like Haida Gwaii, and yeah, really
Yeah, that
fascinating.
very true. Yep. The
What's that? So that
Tasmanian
was
tiger.
the Tasmanian devil, the Tasmanian tiger. So
Yeah.
that was a hit. That was a positive reading experience for you.
It was. My only objection was that as a male writer, I thought one of the two wildly successful characters, who was a woman, was uh, probably it's successful an an abstract sense, but I found her very hard to take. And I thought if a woman had written her, she would have been quite different, or somewhat
Interesting.
different anyway. But otherwise, it's well worth reading. And there's some experimental prose in it that people probably won't like, but there's not a lot. So,
It's nice that there are a few men that can write well, because really, women write so much better.
do you really think so?
Absolutely.
Well, I can think of a few who are, well, an awful lot of them are way better than I am. I'm thinking of Salman Rushdie for one, you know. He's very annoying personality, but he's certainly an amazingly good writer. And, you know, Canadian writers, oh, did you see that Thomas Wharton, the Albertan, just won the Writers Trust Fiction Prize, which is one of the
I
three big prizes. Yeah, he's an Albertan. I think he lives in Edmonton, and the book is called something about the Book of Rain, I think it's called. He's a poetic writer.
Yeah, sounds interesting. I'll check into that.
I haven't read it. Um, I should, but that means I have to buy it because I'll never be able to get it from the library now that it's won a big prize. So here's another writer, though, that I'd like to talk about, and she's an American, and her name is Yiyun Lee, and it's Yiyun, Yiyun, and Lee is Li. And she's an American, born and lived in China until she was 23, and then she went to the United States. Do you know her work at all?
I know quite a bit about her work. Yes,
Yeah. You could hardly say she's a fun read, but
not a fun read. I started with her collection of autobiographical essays that was about
mhm.
mental health struggle and institutionalization, and the
Yes.
essays chronicled how she read her way back to health. And it was
Well,
one of the most transformative books of my life.
really? Are we
Yes,
talking about the same book called Dear Friend, I Write to
yeah,
You from My Life to You in Your Life? Yeah,
that's
that's the
it.
book I was talking about. It's billed as a memoir, you know, and I had read the whole thing and didn't realize that because I thought it
Uh,
was essays.
well, I did too. I describe it as kind of autobiographical essays, so I guess you could quibble about what genre that is, but
Yeah, yeah.
obliterated
What
me.
really? Can you explain why?
No, I can't, but I made a video and I'll put a link in the show notes. And you've seen a couple of my videos. I'm in that
Hmm.
video. I'm so raw. My reaction to it is so raw that I haven't been able to go and watch the video again. I just was kind of
Mm,
not voting, but it lit me up.
yeah, and she is so brilliant, isn't she?
Is now I haven't liked everything that I've read, but that one was one of the most impactful reads of my certainly my of the last decade. So.
Wow. Well, I have, as soon as I get downtown to Shelf Life Books here in Calgary, I'm going to buy myself a copy. I'm reading the library's copy, and I don't think I ought to steal it. So they have my name, they know where I live.
So you're
Anyway,
reading from my life. You're reading that one right now.
yes, I've finished reading it, but it's open to a couple of pages in the other room that I was particularly interested in some of the things she said. I mean, some of her statements, I have to stop. I read it three times. I still don't know, not that I can't quite grip why she's saying this. And that's so original, like such an original thinker. But there's a
Absolutely.
coldness there too, I
There is a
think.
coldness. Absolutely is a coldness. And in some of her fiction, it hasn't worked as well for me. But
Yeah.
um
That's what I'm reading right now. The Book of Geese. I just started it. Uh,
okay, that's her newest one, I believe. Maybe not even. I think
yeah.
she had a short story collection come out after that. But how's the Book
Oh,
of Geese?
well, I've only read about 30 pages or so, so I can't really respond. But what interests me about what I've read so far is how she chooses to write a couple of characters who are really pretty awful people. You know, they're not people that you could love, characters you could love, and even if you could, they wouldn't let you. And it really interests me how I was thinking of Lynn Cody, who won the Giller Prize. She's from Edmonton too, with a collection of short stories called Hell Going. And her characters are all screw ups, and the women who get drunk and behave badly, and they're not the kind of characters I'd ever write. Uh,
Right.
and yet, how interesting they are, how daring that is. I mean, that's how she won the Giller.
I think I have a Lynn Cody book on the shelf back there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, I haven't read anything else but Hell Going, and I was really, it's really compelling material. But I have to think, how do you do that? You know, all my characters are earnest women, who are thinking deeply about their lives. And I don't think I've ever put a drunken character in one of my books, which is weird considering the world is full of drunken characters, or dope
Well,
addicts.
right. I shouldn't even joke about this because I'm not a drunk, but I like my drink. So if you need a role model, Sharon.
Well, in that case, I'm like you. I like a glass of wine too. Her characters, though, are young women. Obviously, these are unhappy people or troubled people, is maybe better. And drinking too much is what they do. I've never tried to write such a character.
Well, who knows what might come down, might inspire you next.
You never know.
Do you read one book at a time or more than one?
I read a whole bunch. I was reading all those books at the same time. And there's some here I haven't mentioned that one of the ones that I'm partway through and then I got sidetracked by Yiyun Lee is Laurie Hamill, her new novel called Flicker, which, she's thought highly enough of that she's got University of Calgary Press. She's from Calgary. And that the University of Saskatchewan creative writing department invited her to come and present to the creative writing students. So, her reputation is building. She's a lovely human being, too.
I'm aware of her, haven't read her, and I couldn't go to that event when she was in Saskatoon, but she is friends with the Calgary novelist Barb Howard, who is been a frequent guest on my channel.
One of
I
the
know.
other books I'm reading right now is I do an hour-long literary chat with a gentleman with a PhD whom I've never met. I've only talked to him. He's a retired professor. I've only talked to him on the phone. We don't even do Zoom, so I can only guess at what he looks like. But once a week, we talk literature, and it's an organized sort of thing. And we're doing Virginia Woolf right now and making our way through The Waves. So that's another book I'm reading.
That's a book that's had a deep impact on me when I read it many years ago.
Yeah, critics like Harold Bloom, whom I'm also reading bit by bit, and he's dead, oh, there. The Bright Book of Life. He has a long essay on the waves, a short essay on the waves, and he suggests that it might be simply a long prose poem.
Certainly poetic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. I want to get in line to talk to you weekly about literature, Sharon, but I think you're kind of busy.
Oh, not anymore. No. Once the book stuff was done, I wasn't. I've stopped running around, so I'm mostly going to be here rewriting my memoir.
Good luck with that. And we're going to be talking about the perfection of the morning one day fairly soon, perhaps, and an open invitation to come back on any Friday, Thursday or Friday, to tell us about some recent reading.
Okay, I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.
What an absolute delight it was to talk books with Sharon Butala. All right, here's the week in review.
I think what she appreciates in the article and why I'm drawn to prep school books and boarding school books is you get this perfect crucible of children that are forced to be together 24/7, and so you get this whole subculture where you don't really have parental involvement. You don't have them worrying about their siblings or things in their community. It's all like your whole life is wrapped up in this one little environment. And so it can be rife with racial tension, with class tension, hazing, all this kind of stuff can be going on, and you get it all in this tiny little tight environment. And so it can be great fodder for a good story.
If you haven't really noticed it, hasn't been a big problem for you.
I guess in a way, maybe we've been primed for this, is maybe what I'm saying, because Cormac McCarthy doesn't use them. And I remember his thoughts. The article does point out that he, in an interview, said if you write well enough, you don't need punctuation marks at all, let alone quotation marks. And I remember reading that when he said that and thinking about that. So I guess maybe I'd made my peace with it, a couple decades ago or so, and hadn't noticed that more and more of our contemporary authors are getting rid of them.
Just finished reading the story and doing my hair. But first I have to have a little rant about leaf blower machines. The portable ones, they carry like this astronaut backpack on their backs, and the emergency neon orange vests, and they just go around blowing stuff year round. They blow snow with it. They blow leaves with it. I don't know what the hell he's blowing today, but he's been doing it, or they've been doing it for 3 hours. And it's just I think as I get older, I'm getting more sensitive to noise. It drives me batty. All right. I have finished 2. I have no bales to tell you about this week, and I've started 3 that I'm a ways into and can check in on, plus 1 more that I'm going to check in on. So, got lots to tell you. I have finished this short story collection by Marian Engel, The Tattooed Women. This was for a Zoom discussion, the 3rd annual Marian Engel colloquy that I have had 2 years running in the past with Dorian Stuber and James Morrison, and this year we added another Marian Engel aficionado to the group, Chris of the Bookluggers, and then we all started reading the short story collection, and it wasn't very good. So we decided not to record a Zoom chat or even bother chatting about it, because it was just a very subpar collection. And we didn't decide ultimately until the very last minute, so I did finish the collection, and I would have bailed had we made this decision earlier. And in fact, as much as I love bailing, and I'm a proselytizer of bailing as the way to guarantee the most exuberantly satisfying reading life possible, because we didn't bail, because we didn't decide until the last minute, and I did read the entire collections, there were 2 or 3 at the end that were real bangers. Am I using that word? Is it a British slang? It's certainly way too young for me to be using it. Really excellent short stories at the end. But that still is I gave it 3 stars, so it wasn't very good. 2 5-star, maybe 3 5-star stories at the end out of 15 or 20 short stories is still a book that shouldn't have been published. She died very young in 1985, and this was published maybe the year of her death. So the sad thing is that her stories got better. If they were organized chronologically, I'm assuming they were. They did get better, but most of them were pretty awful. I think Marian Engel actually was a one-hit wonder, and The Bear is her one book that you should read. The novella that we read last year wasn't very good, and we're not going to continue. So we have not abandoned the annual get-together. In fact, I think we're going to meet more often and discuss other books. It's going to be it's going to be a book club type thing that we'll bring to my channel. The book we're going to read next is Summer by Edith Wharton. Much more happily, I have finished The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley. This was a reread for me. I studied this in the 80s as an undergrad. I remembered the premise of it, and that's it. And that there's so much to it. It's such a layered, character-driven story about a 12-year-old kid who comes from a lower class than his friend who he goes and stays with during a 10-day or 2-week measles outbreak-related unexpected holiday from boarding school. And he gets all mixed up with the family and people there, including passing love notes back and forth between his buddy's older daughter, who's about to be married off to the squire, the nobleman of the town, but she doesn't love him, and she's having a very steamy love affair with the farmer down the road, and this kid, Leo, is taking notes back and forth. And, as somebody who really doesn't get along with a lot of child-centered narratives, this is one of the very best. I would say this is the best, because Leo doesn't really, his sexuality hasn't started to bud, and he has no idea that he's passing love notes between lovers. He thinks they tell him that they're doing some kind of business together, and when he discovers that, he is just devastated because he's disappointed. And we also have the older Leo, an elderly man, 60-something man, looking back, and we hear his voice too. But to capture that proto adolescent boy's voice and get inside his head and all of his superstitions and magical beliefs and nerdy, boyish preoccupations, and to thread this love story using his unreliable narrative, it was a tour de force, I thought. Now, it does have an epilogue, and I'm coming to realize that there's a lot of readers out there that don't like epilogues that jump ahead in time and kind of give you a new perspective or added information. It's more of a 19th century thing, isn't it? The one that I hated passionately, that's from a modern novel, what is her name? Anne Patchett, Bel Canto, because she added an epilogue that just totally undid all of the things that up until that point it would have been a 5-star read for me. I've probably soured on the rest of the narrative now, but that epilogue just made me throw the book across the room. I was so angry. Now, earlier this year, I read Abdulrazak Gurna's most recent novel, Afterlives, and that was a pseudo-buddy read with Roz of Scally Dandling about the books and Tilly of Tilly's Shelf. And Roz didn't like the epilogue. It wasn't an epilogue, but it was kind of tying up a bunch of loose ends by projecting into the future. It really was an epilogue, except in name. And she didn't like that. And Tilly and I thought it was fine, and I still think it was fine. Jo Smith read it independently around the same time, and she really disliked the epilogue, or that part of the ending, and it's made me think about this some more. So I buddy read this one with Sonia of An Enthusiastic Reader, and I checked in first on the ending, and I said, yeah, the epilogue didn't bother me. I thought it was quite interesting, and I know some people don't like epilogues. What did you think? And she checked in a day later and said, yeah, I didn't like the epilogue. I thought it kind of didn't ruin the book, didn't ruin the ending, but it detracted from the power of the end of the story. And so now I'm thinking about it, and I'm here giving you my hot take. I'm still thinking about it, and what Sonia said is convincing me. So I'm in flux about the ending. If you have read The Go-Between, please leave a comment below. Did you like the epilogue? Did it work for you? Why or why not? How do you feel about epilogues in general? It's kind of a thing maybe that I should do a zooming in episode about. Epilogues are not something I've thought about kind of discreetly, other than I had such a severe reaction to the Bel Canto epilogue and didn't at all mind the one for the Gurna novel. This one, I'm still sorting it all out, but other than that, this is one of the best novels of the 20th century. So that's what I finished. Let me tell you about 3 books that I've started this week, and because they're buddy reads, I've done enough reading that I'm ready to check in on them. The first one is Thomas King's most recent literary novel, or non-mystery novel, Indians on Vacation, and I'm absolutely loving this. This is hilarious and light. It's a very light tale about probably his alter ego, Bird, and Bird's wife, Mimi. And they're seem to be almost completely modeled on Thomas King and his wife, whose name I don't have in my head, going to Europe, going to Prague. He's kind of a grumpy old man. He wanted to stay home with his feet up, but he's had some health issues, and he's got some psychological issues that his wife thinks they need to get away, and he doesn't really want to be there, and he's kind of being an old poop, and it's really it's hilarious, really. I mean, I guess hilarious means laugh out loud. I haven't been laughing out loud, but it's just making me chuckle. And introducing Indigenous themes and Indigenous politics in such a subtle way. So the other thing is that Mimi, who is Indigenous, Mimi's uncle, or great uncle perhaps, disappeared early in the 20th century. And that family, Mimi and her uncle's family, they are from the Blackfoot people, who live mostly in what is uncomfortably called Canada, in Alberta. And when he left, when he kind of ran away or whatever, and he took one of the bundles and went to Europe, and nobody knows what happened to him or the bundle. And so that's part of the reason that they're in Europe. I read a nonfiction book about repatriating those sacred bundles back to the Blackfoot people last year. That was called We Are Coming Home, Repatriation and the Restoration of Blackfoot Cultural Confidence, edited by Gerald T. Conity. And it was almost like an anthology of essays by various members of the Blackfoot tribe and museum people about that process. Just one of the most important, beautiful works of nonfiction I've read recently, and that makes a wonderful companion volume. I mean, I don't know where the story is going to go, but I think ultimately I will certainly say it's a great companion volume to this story. But this story is hilarious, and Heidi and I are really enjoying it, and that's what I have to say about it. I have to say I'm not as sure yet about this one. This is In the Upper Country by Kai Thomas. 2023 work of historical fiction set in Blacktown in Upper Canada or Ontario. I can't remember. When did Upper Canada become Ontario? Jesus, Sean, you should know this. Oh, no. Upper Canada entered in 1841. So then it became maybe Canada West. I'm just going to say Ontario. Set in Ontario around 1860. And it is populated with mostly formerly enslaved people who escaped to Canada via the Underground Railroad. And it's a really vibrant, vivid picture of this town. And our first-person narrator is working as a reporter at the Black newspaper in town and living with the editor, Arabella, two women, and it seems like they might be lovers. I'm not sure. That part is really interesting. There's a lot about it that's really interesting and holding my interest. Absolutely. I just think it's overwritten and very poorly paced. There is some very dramatic scenes, lots of action, and they were just so badly paced that I was hard to stay awake through them, and they were key dramatic incidents. But the way they were narrated, just I thought were, first novel kind of weakness, I guess. But so much else to admire here. I just think it's a little bit padded. It's probably a book that needed a better edit. Well, I'm 90 pages in. I'm not going to bail on this because this is a very special kind of buddy read. This is a buddy read with Robin, one of my patrons at the Bibliophile Bestie tier, and I would never bail on a buddy read with a patron, so I'm going to finish it. But I'm not sure how much I'm going to enjoy it. What I will say is the author, Kai Thomas, a writer, carpenter, and land steward, an Afro-Canadian descended from Trinidad and the British Isles, is a hottie, and he's certainly got literary talent. I think this one wasn't fully baked, and like too many novels, wasn't ready to be published when it was published. That's my preliminary verdict. And let's go to one of my favorite writers, Elizabeth Jane Howard. Her fifth novel? I've lost count. I'm reading them in chronological order with my friend Leah. This one's called After Julius, and it was published in 1965. It's wonderful. It isn't that extraordinary, I guess, if you just step back and think about it, but I can't believe how different all her novels are. And there's no characters that really compare one to another, no storylines. She just kind of reinvents the wheel every time, and masterfully. So really enjoying this one. This one's, here I go again, very different from all the others I've read. It's 20 years after the father of the family died, and we don't know quite how he died, but he died at the beginning of the Blitz, so presumably it was in the Blitz, but he went off to work, and then he was dead, and the narrator has not disclosed to me, the reader, what exactly happened to him, and he left behind his wife, Esme, who's one of the main characters, and two daughters, Cressida, or Cressy, the oldest daughter, and Emma, the younger daughter. These three women couldn't be more different one from the other, and Cressy, after being widowed early in the war, she barely even spent more than a week in the same bed with her husband before he was... I've started laughing, and now I feel guilty for laughing, because the sentence doesn't end well, before he's killed in the war. And so she's a very, very young widow, and then for the next 20 years, she just keeps getting into affair after affair with a series of married men that rivals my dance card when I was that age. And so she's fascinating and confused, and there's an element of self-deprecatory humor she has about her imbroglios. She's a wonderful character. Her younger sister is plain, She works at the father's publishing house. It's a family publishing house. The father's been dead for 20 years, but she has a fairly low-level job as an editor. And she brings home one of the roughest characters I've ever met, certainly in an Elizabeth Jane Howard novel. I'd even missed that he was a poet, but he had a book published there years ago, and we meet him, and he's hungover and just completely rough around the edges in a way that he almost seems like a street person. And he walks into the publisher and says, "You owe me some money for my books." And it's this daughter that he meets, and she gives him $100. And then within 10 more minutes of conversation, she invites him home to her house. And that's where I'm at in this story. So I don't know where it's going, but it's certainly interesting. And I don't know why Elizabeth Jane Howard is not considered one of the very best novelists in the UK, certainly of the second half of the 20th century, because she is. I have one more book to tell you about. I have now read 40 pages of Open City by Teju. This is one of the books that I said if I didn't read this year, I had to unhaul. And I was kind of anticipating a bail and not sure about it. And several of you weighed in, and the comments I received didn't seem all that enthusiastic, or people had read the book 20 years ago or whenever when it first came out. Didn't really remember it. So I really wasn't sure. It was published in 2011. I have to say, after 40 pages, that I'm absolutely loving it. It's so meditative. And I got to page 20 before I gave my head a shake that no, this was actually a novel, because it reads like memoir, or it reads like an autobiographical first-person narrative. But Teju is not a doctor. The narrator here is. They both were Nigerian men who lived most of their adult lives in America, particularly New York City. And this character, what is his name? Do we know his name? Julius. His name is Julius. Today is a Julius kind of day. He loves to walk, and so these long passages of the protagonist Julius perambulating around New York and vividly describing all that he sees and all that he encounters, including New York Marathon and political protests, but not just that. Characters that he meets, people he knows. One of my favorite passages so far is he visits 88-year-old former professor, Japanese-American guy, who had been interned in prison camps in the States during the Second World War, who had taught him early literature, like not Chaucer, but something of that era. And even though Julius wasn't a very good student, the professor took him under his wing, and so they became friends. And that kind of resonated for me, as I've got some ex-professors, former professors in my life of late, and it was quite touching. So here's the thing. I got halfway through these 40 pages before I gave my head a shake, as I just said, and realized this is a novel. Well, the professor doesn't exist, but he gives him such a specific area of scholarly expertise. But if you Google his name, nothing comes up. And then that happened again with, I think this doctor is actually a psychiatrist. The narrative has not said he is a psychiatrist or I am a psychiatrist, but he must be, because he's treating people with mental health issues or emotional problems. And one of his clients wrote a book on the Dutch colonial kind of tyrant in Manhattan back in the 17th century, Cornelis van Tienhoven. Now, he exists, but this client of this protagonist, Dr. Julius, wrote a book about him called The Monster of New Amsterdam. That book doesn't exist, and there's been no recent biography, like since the year 2000, of Cornelis van Tienhoven. So this is fictional, but it's got all this information about Van Tienhoven, which is tying into indigenous and civil rights issues that come up in other contexts. It's absolutely fascinating, and he's creating these characters who are writing books that I want to read, but these books don't exist. Well, that was fascinating, and the chapter I just finished was on one of these leisurely walks through New York City. Julius wanders into a folk museum. I didn't check if the museum exists, but one of the artists who he is quite taken with is a folk artist, I think also from the 17th century, called John Brewster. And John Brewster does exist, and so talk about ekphrasis. He gives these sensuous, historically lush, vivid descriptions of the art he's looking at on the wall of the museum, and these paintings exist, and so I was bringing them up and just falling into the text. Just loved it. So sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but it's all true. Like, it's really, really grabbing me. I mean, it's not a page turner in the sense of there's nothing really that happens. Like his personal life, there's a little bit. He's thinking about his grandma, who he's estranged from because he's estranged from his mother, and breaking up with his girlfriend, but that's not the focus of it. It's just this really, I almost said Proustian, which is a bad word in my readerly vocabulary, but what makes it so much better than Proust is there's ruminations on the social political stuff threaded through all the aesthetics, and it's not just pretentious dribble like Proust inflicted on the world. It's early days. I've read 40 pages. I am mesmerized by what I'm reading. I am going to start one. It's the last book that I've decided that I'm going to tackle on that list of books that I said I'd have to deal with, read, or bail on, or whatever, or on haul. I'm going to leave one that I've quite deliciously decided I am going to unhaul. I'll save that news for another video, but this is a South African novel. Alex Laguma's In the Fog of the Season's End, which is one of those old Heinemann African Writers Series books, published in 1972. And Alex Guma at that time lived in exile in London, left South Africa in 1966. I'm pulling up his Wikipedia page. Alex Guma died in 1985. He was a defendant in the treason trial. Well, that was maybe the penultimate trial of that Mandela was charged, but all of them were acquitted in 1956. Alex Guma died in Havana, Cuba in 1985. And he's described as a novelist, so I'm going to pretty much presume this is a novel, not a memoir. And that's all I'm going to say now, but I'm looking forward to finally. I've had this book. I think I bought it in Tokyo. I'm pretty sure I bought it in Tokyo. And probably one of those ones that was on the shelf outside the philosophy store. One of my favorite places in all of Tokyo that no longer exists, but got so many great books like this that I would never have come across otherwise. So it's time to give this one a try. All right, well, just telling you about all that has got me all stoked to keep on reading and keep on keeping on. Thanks for watching.